Today I have another story for you. Do you remember a few weeks ago we had the creation story? And at the end of that story, you probably remember that the earth was finally ready for that other part of the story. Plants and animals had come, fish and birds were able to come. Trees and flowers all came on the timeline of life. That second story that we told, life was able to come. And at the end of that timeline, human beings came. You remember? That was another part of the story about us, boys and girls, men and women, and about how and when they came to the earth and what they have been doing on the earth. We've also had the black strip and the hand timeline, and we talked about men and women and children and what they have been doing since they have been on the earth. You remember? Now today, I have a story about something that happened after men and women and children had been living on the earth for a while. We don't know exactly how long they had been on the earth when this story begins. It's one of those once upon a time story, but it is a true story. When men and women and children first lived on the earth, they needed food just like we need food. So they started to look around to find things that were good for them to eat. You remember we talked about human beings and when they first came, how it was a long time ago and there weren't any supermarkets or grocery stores for them to go to. They had to look for themselves and find what they could eat. And when someone found something and tasted it and liked it, she or he told the other people around, "Look what I found. This is good to eat." Maybe she said, "This banana tastes sweet," or "This is good to eat." But then there was a problem. What was a person to do if she had walked far away from all the other people and they were no longer close enough to hear her? Even if she shouted at the top of her lungs, and yet she wanted to let people know what she had found, she would not be able to reach out to them. This was a real problem. Someone we don't know whom it was came up with an idea. Well, we'll make a picture, and in this way we leave a message. So for a long time, this was what people did. For a long time, people in those far away, long ago, once upon a time days, made pictures for what was important and what was meant to be told other people around them. And so time went on and on and on, and picture messages went on and on and on. And then during the time of the picture messages, one group of people called the Egyptians started to make different kinds of pictures. Sometimes they carved them in a stone. Sometimes after carving the pictures, they painted them. And then they decided that they better find a quicker and easier way to make their pictures for messages. You can imagine how long it took to carve stone. So they found a way of making a kind of paper from a plant that grew near their big river in their country. With the paper that they made, they used a brush to draw their pictures on the paper, and that's what they did for a long time. Then somebody had another idea, the idea of making something different to draw the pictures with. They made a kind of pen that they could use to draw the pictures. But it still wasn't always easy to really know for sure what these picture messages meant, or what kind of message they were really supposed to be given. Very often, people had to guess what the message really meant, and often they guessed wrong. You see, sometimes the Egyptians used a picture to mean an object or a thing, like a table or pen. They drew pictures for those things. But sometimes they used a picture to mean an idea about something they were thinking about. And sometimes they used a picture to mean just a sound. So the picture that an Egyptian made for a leg might have meant leg, but the same picture might have meant running, and the same picture might have meant quick. So you can see that it was confusing. People just weren't sure what was meant, and they tended to get mixed up. Sometime later, after the Egyptians had worked on their picture messages, we find that there was another group of people. These were the Phoenicians. And they also lived a long time ago, just like the Egyptians. Now the Egyptians lived near the Nile River in Egypt, and they grew crops and were farmers. The Phoenicians were sailors, and they sailed in their vessels to many different countries. In their ships, they carried silver and spices and perfume and jewelry and ornaments. They carried vases and crystal and gold and glass, all kinds of beautiful things that people wanted to buy from them. They also carried some very special something that only the Phoenicians have ever made. This special thing was a special dye. It was called Tyrian purple, royal purple. It was the color used by kings and emperors. It wasn't really the color of purple that we know today, but rather a kind of red. Well, the Phoenicians carried all of their goods in their ships, and they sailed from city to city, and they sold their goods in these other places. Many people wanted what they had, especially the Tyrian purple cloth. People thought it was something very special, and it was. But that's not the real reason why the Phoenicians were so important to us. The Phoenicians are so important to human beings, important to us, boys and girls, men and women, for something much more important than the Tyrian purple. The Phoenicians knew about the picture writing of the Egyptians, and they knew that sometimes a picture meant an object, and other times an idea, and other times a sound. And they knew that Egyptians used them all mixed up, so that the sound could mean different things. Because the Phoenicians were so busy with all of the selling that they did and all of the selling of their goods, they did not have much time to spend making complicated pictures. They wanted an easier way to record what people were selling and what people were buying. So the Phoenicians did something very clever. They decided to only keep the sound pictures from the Egyptians, and they changed them a little bit. Then they decided to only keep a few of them, but with those few sound pictures, it was much easier to write what they wanted to say. Can you imagine what the Phoenicians had found out so long ago is what you found out when you started working with the sandpaper letters? Do you remember the sandpaper letters from your preschool classes? And how easy it was to make the word cat? All you had to do was find the sandpaper letter for k, which the Phoenicians had made so simple, and then the sandpaper letters for a and t, which the Phoenicians had also made so clear and simple. Just those little marks. Do you remember working with the sandpaper letters and how easy they were? But the story doesn't end there with the Phoenicians. They made that exciting discovery for us. But as time went on, and time went on, and time went on, something else happened. People called the Greeks took the Phoenician letters and changed their shapes a little bit, and they used those letters, and then time continued. And some other people called the Romans changed the shape of the letters a little bit more. It is the Romans who are credited with first calling the 26 letters of the Phoenician alphabet. Do you remember the movable alphabet and all the words and stories that you could write with those letters? What you have to remember and be glad about is the story of the Phoenicians, because they made the first real letters for sounds, and in that way made it possible for us to let other people know what we wanted to say, even if those other people are too far away to hear our voices. This was such an exciting discovery. In the beginning, it was hard for some people that it was possible. At the beginning of those marks of the Phoenicians, some people thought that it was magic. When someone had written a message and someone else was able to read it and understand it, some people said, no, that's not possible. It must be magic. Do you remember the story that was read to you the other day? You remember the name of the author? It was the Phoenicians that made it possible for the author to write that story so that it could be read to you. So I think we should say thank you to the Phoenicians. Don't you think so? We should. So do you want to say thank you to the Phoenicians along with me? Thank you, Phoenicians.